Hi, and welcome to this lecture in the series of lectures on C# programming. This particular lecture will focus on repositories and mainly GitHub. Okay, so I am Dr. Peter O'Neill, your presenter. The purpose. We've all tried to enhance code and broken it. Wouldn't it be nice if we could turn back the clock? Repositories enable this. Yes, they let you turn the clock back, but only to a point that you created. Imagine pressing the button and placing a copy of your code in a local trunk. In addition, keeping all previous versions of the source code, retaining the order they were submitted in, lets you invite others and create a different version for them, called branches. Yes, we are still talking about repositories. Operations. Right, the main operations of a repository. Commit data. So here's our source code, and every time we commit, we add a layer on top. Okay? And so on. In addition to committing our source code, we can also add comments to each commit. So we can say what we were doing at that particular time. For example, installing an OK button, or writing the code so that when the OK is called, it saves the relevant data to a relevant file, and we can explain this. It also saves the number, so it knows what order they were placed in, and who placed it, by the way. Because don't forget, this is also extremely useful for when it comes to working in groups, because different people come and go on to different branches, and you can all be committing together. So you can work in different branches and then bring the code back together as one. Right? This enables you also to compare pieces of code. So the previous what you've written with what you've written now. Add additional notes later on, etc. This is built into Visual Studio 19. Some basic terminology. Commit. Save a copy of your source code to a local directory. Synchronize. Copy your committed version of your local directory to your online repository at GitHub or other provider. Repo means a repository, online and locally. Clone means essentially you take your repository that's online and a person can clone it or download it to their local PC and then have a copy of your code. GitHub Desktop. Now, there is such thing as a GitHub Desktop, and this is basically how it works. So, here we go. So we have a local client, which is our PC, with Visual Studio 2019 in it, and we keep committing to our local repository, which is this one. Okay? So here's our commits to our local repository. And every now and again, we synchronize it. And as you can see, the arrows, there we are, we're sending the data now across the green arrow as it appears and runs across the screen. And it deposits that into our GitHub on the server. Okay? And it makes additional notes and numbering and everything for you. Now, that actually works on the desktop application, but it also does the same thing within Visual Studio. So, as I said, from Visual Studio 2015, GitHub was integrated within the application. Now also note that GitHub is also now owned by Microsoft. It wasn't previously. This integration simplifies us using repositories, which is a good help. So, let's watch a media file showing us Visual Studio setup and a few commits. You will need to visit the github.com and set up an account with them before you try this. Request a student account with a private repository for your assignments.
This video is going to demonstrate the use of Visual Studio 2019, and you're going to see some updates to the interface which are quite different from previous versions of Visual Studio. I'm also going to show how Visual Studio integrates with the GitHub and local Git repository. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to launch Visual Studio 2019, and you'll see already immediately the differences in the interface. And right here, when it comes up, you see that already the way that you choose sort of how to create a new project and what language and template you're going to use is very different than previous versions. So we're going to click on Create New Project. And then in Create New Project, if you see up here at the top of the interface, there is, you choose which language. We're going to choose C# because we're going to demonstrate this by building a console application in C#, and we're going to look at how to synchronize that with a local Git repository, and then how to synchronize that with a remote GitHub repository. So I'm going to choose console app, and I'm going to hit next. I then name my project, so we're just going to call this Visual Studio 2019 C# Git demo. And the default location here is CUsers, my username, source repos. And this may or may not be checked on yours if this is the first time you've run this. So you have to select place the solution and project in the same directory if you want both of them to be the same. And so you click create. And when you do that, takes a minute. It's going to create the project, and then I'm going to show you one thing that you will have to do if you haven't already to get Git and GitHub integrated with your Visual Studio environment. So here we have the project that's created. Nothing exciting here. Before we look at this project, because this looks fairly close to previous versions of Visual Studio, but if we go here and we launch the Visual Studio installer for 2019, and as it launches, you will see that you have to go to the individual components, and you'll see that in just a minute. First, you'll see I have both versions of Visual Studio installed. We're going to modify my Visual Studio Community. This is the Community Edition I'm using, 2019. If you click Modify, it will show everything that you currently have installed when you initially installed Visual Studio. And if you go to Individual Components, I've already installed it, but over here on the right you would see GitHub extension for Visual Studio. You would see that listed here on the left under these individual components. There's also Git for Windows. So GitHub extension for Visual Studio is the add-on to Visual Studio that allows you to publish it to the remote GitHub repository. So for instance, I'm already logged into my GitHub repository here in a browser, and then the Git for Windows, it adds and installs Git, which is the code versioning system for your local Windows operating system. So I've already got those added. If you don't, this is where you would add those. You would select these two, and then you would just install and download those to make sure that they're included. So I've already got that done. I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm just going to keep this code here. And just so you can see what it does, I'm going to build the solution. And Visual Studio 2019, when you run the console app, it automatically pauses here and says, okay, hello world, and then press any key to close this window, which I think is pretty nice. Previous versions didn't always do that. You had to add additional code to have it pause like that. So if we want first to, we've written an application here, we've got it started. The first thing that you want to do is you want to add it to your local Git repository. So that's where you click on File and it says Add to Source Control. So you click on that, and by doing that, some things happen, right? So it takes the files and it creates a local repository here, and it makes a commit to the local repository, and the default is in the path of your repository. It creates a folder that is the same name as your project. So Visual Studio indicates that the local repository has been created, and it's now locally synchronizing. So the other thing that you'll see is this tab right here that says Team Explorer. And currently I'm signed into my remote GitHub account. So I'm just going to click sign out. You probably will see this right here where it says GitHub Inc. And if you click this connect button, it will then launch the login for GitHub, and you just log into your GitHub account. Click sign in, and the password for this is going to be the same password you would use to log into your GitHub account on the internet in the browser. So once we do that, we are able to do several different things. By default, you can see here at the top that I'm connected locally, and what I can do is sync that local repository that I'm currently connected to. I can sync it and publish it to my remote GitHub account. So currently, so for instance, right now it says Visual Studio 2019 C# Git demo, and we don't see that right here, just for demonstration purposes. So what I'm gonna do is publish that to GitHub. And it's going to say, hey, is this right here the account that you want to publish this to? And this is going to be the name of your repository by default. It will be the same name as your project. You can put a description in here. And we're just going to do that. And we could just click publish here. And when it does that, it's going to take the local repository and it's going to take the name that I've created, and it's going to generate a repository in my GitHub account. So now you see right here, I've got Visual Studio 2019 C# Get Demo. So when I click on that, you're going to see that these are all of the files that are included in my C# project. So if I click on this program.cs, which is what I currently have open by default in Visual Studio 2019, program.cs, you will see that it has the code here that I've typed. So now what I want to do is demonstrate real quickly, what if we make a change? So if I come here and I just add another line of code and I say console.write line, and I say here is a change, and so we just take that new code, and I'm just going to build the application, and we can run it just to see, verify. So it says hello world, here is a change, press any key to continue. So we do that. Now the very first thing that we need to do is we need to synchronize those changes with our local repository. So we can commit those changes, make a comment, and we just commit to all of those. So it'll say, hey, you've committed this change locally. Do you want to synchronize to share your changes with the server? So we can then click on sync, and we can see here that here's a comment that I had just made where I had made a commitment locally. And do I want to push that? And so I push that to the current branch. And so we successfully push that to the local branch. So let's see what happens here. And when we click on this program CS again, we could see that console.writeLine here is a change that my code has been synchronized from my local repository to my GitHub repository. And this is how we work with our code locally in Git, and how we can use Visual Studio 2019 to publish our code and our changes to our code to a remote GitHub repository.
Okay, so commits should be undertaken at the completion of each small incremental step. Summary should be precise, e.g. implementation of OK button. Description should be what it says, describing. On selecting OK, save the required data to the stated TBX file, TBX path, and clear the GUI. Cloning or clone. This enables you to work on your source code in a number of locations. It also allows others to have a copy of your code. Please be aware that when you're doing this, if you're sharing and it's an assignment, this would get you in serious trouble. Allows team members to develop to work with the same project at the same time. Now that's important, because if you're working as a group on a project, you can create different branches and work on your own branch, and then pull your branches back into the main stem or to the trunk so you can all work together on the same project, different elements of it. Rules, or basic rules I call them. Once a project is in the repository, before you change any source code, sync it. The reason why is you don't know, especially if you're working in a team, if somebody else has changed something. So you need to sync your own first. Always commit in small incremental steps and working source code wherever possible. If you have to commit in incomplete source code, explain the point that you are at fully within the description. Do not commit without writing a summary or description ever. You'll pay for it dearly. Okay? These are basic rules, and if you keep following them, you'll find that a repository is a brilliant thing. Any questions? Please email me or speak with me during your tutorial session. Thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed the video.